So actually, I'll call on you at this point. What other sort of because you see where I'm going with this,
Yes.
right? What other sorts of things that sort of
Well,
tacit understandings between human beings in North America that we have. So one is personal space, the other is the idea, definitely the idea of personal property. Like, I mean, we basically, you don't even go up and put your hand on somebody else's car, for example. It's just a hunk of metal sitting on the side of the road, right? And touching somebody's car isn't going to harm it in any way. But we still, you would never do that because
for sure. And the idea of process, like we have a whole idea around, declare it, not just that you wouldn't go without an invitation, but even if it's somebody official, a police officer or a government official, they would declare themselves as they're entering, even if they have the right to enter. They tell you who they are, and you get an idea right away.
Yes, yeah. Okay, so you understand what it is, where I'm going with this. So there's also another thing that goes on too in this Golfito in Costa Rica comes to mind, where we pulled in, and in this case it was on a motor yacht. We pulled into, where were we? Bahia Honda. And it's one of those villages that still exists where they don't have any electricity, and they basically they make their own dugout canoes and then this kind of thing, right? So we pull in, and on this 65-foot motor yacht, and it looks like a spaceship to those people, right? And they come out, and typically what happens is they'll give you lobster and conch and all kinds of other fabulous seafood in exchange for AA batteries, or cans of Coke, fishing line, this kind of stuff, right? Fishing lures. So there's that. So anyway, so taking all of that and applying it to that situation where these guys were coming on board, this was my mind was trying to process: are these guys on board because they want to trade with us? Are they looking for some work, temporary work to do to make some money, etc.? So once my mind got past that, and then I fully understood what was going on, I realized, okay, these guys, they're here to rob us. And that's usually what it means when somebody comes on your yacht with an 8-inch, hunting knife, right? So, when the leader came on board, and they were all just in bathing suits, because they had actually they had actually swum to the yacht because we were on anchor, right? And because it's a big 41-foot catamaran, we didn't even feel them board, right? The yacht didn't shift at all in the water. So the leader coming in, the first one coming in low with the biggest of the knives, he kept repeating, "Calma, calma, calma." I spoke good enough Spanish that I understood immediately that they weren't speaking Portuguese, right? And then I found out later that the language they were speaking was sort of like a combination of Portuguese and Creole or something like that. But for the most part, I didn't understand any. In fact, the only time I understood what he was saying was when he tried to speak English. So the first moment, the initial few minutes he came in, it was calma, calma. So I understood what he was saying. He was basically saying, be calm, and then everything's going to be okay, right? And then as he was leaving, he was standing there with the knife saying, "No police, no police." And I understood that too. Don't call the police after we're gone, right? So anyway, they came in low. My brain finally, my poor, innocent, and beautiful mind finally registered, okay, we're being attacked. They've come on board to rob us. So I immediately, instinctively, defensively put my arms out in front of Dave and Mary, and I said, everybody stay calm. They're going to be here for a bit. They're coming to rob us. Let them take what they want, and they're going to leave. Stay calm. I looked over to my left, just as Steve was coming up from the starboard side, the starboard pontoon. And I looked over just in time to see him do this. He threw his hands up because the guy was standing in front of him with the butcher knife. So he put his hands up, and then he carefully moved over, and then they put him in the seat behind the dining room table beside me, and they took Mary out. And then for the next, whatever it was, 15 minutes, they used Mary to go up and down, to go below and bring up cash and jewels and watches and computers and anything else that, you know. At one point, I think it was the first time that she came up with money and whatever, she was looking over at me and saying, what do I do now? Well, you know, what should I do? There isn't any. I said, Maggie's, just see if there's a few dollars around. Give them, some euros or something, so that we can get them off the yacht. Again, telling her to stay calm. And, so she went back down again, and at that point, Mary started to lose, control, and she started to go into shock, and she was calling out things like, I have a heart trouble, I am on heart medication, this kind of thing. But of course, these guys, they didn't understand a word she was saying anyway. So again, keeping her calm, I quickly took a look to see what was going on with Dave and with Scott. They were both totally in shock. It was kind of hard to get a beat on Dave, but from Steve, I could see he was completely in shock. His pupils were fixed, his hands were on the table, and he wasn't registering at all. And this kind of thing, of course, he wouldn't be able to process what was going on. Mary finally brought up everything that she was able to find, everything that she thought would be of any value to the robbers. And they sat her down on the other end, so to my left on the other side of Steve. They sat her down there, and so the details are coming back, and it's in sort of little bits and pieces. So one of the other things that I would try to do, so while Mary was being was being told to go down to bring up the any valuables she could find, I actually tried to bring my leg up so that my foot, the bottom of my shoe, would be up against the back of the
wall of the boat.
The back of the seat, right, of the settee. Because again, I'm thinking to the end. I didn't know if these guys were going to try to kill us or what, right? But I very well knew that was the scenario. That was the situation I was in. So I tried to get my leg up to get leverage so that I could push myself off. Because remember, when you're sitting behind, on most yachts, when you're sitting behind the dining table, you're jammed in there, you're stuck in there. And there's actually a point for that too, because if you're at sea, you want to be tucked in there. You don't want to be thrown around by the movement of the yacht, right? So I was trapped in there. And that pretty much explains most of what I was feeling, just that helplessness from being trapped. So anyway, I tried to bring my leg up, and in doing so, one of the guys noticed immediately, and he immediately came over with his knife, and he was pointing to what I was doing with my leg and shaking the knife. No. Because
what did you do then?
Well, I brought my leg down immediately, but while it was up for that split second, I was testing the table because I was prepared to push myself off if I had to, if they were going to kill us, that is. There was no hero stuff going on at all. which leads actually to another interesting sort of thing I have to say about that, because some people have told me, you know, if that was me, I would have done this or that. But anyway, I was testing the table, and I was going to use my foot to leverage myself off, rip the table right off its mount if they attacked us, right? So they noticed right away, and then they posted one of the guys to stand right beside the table watching me specifically the entire time.
And just because I know you, Jason,
Yeah.
and people watching may not know you, I want to bring up, and I know you don't bring this up yourself, but you did do martial arts for a while before, and I'm not saying that to try and say that you're a martial artist right now, but that you have a sense of your body and you have a sense of movement.
Absolutely.
And not that you would go into some kind of crazy moves or anything,
Yeah,
but you
yeah.
you have an idea of, like, when you I know you to say that if you were going to try and leverage yourself and rip the table off, it's because you know that you'd be able to do that.
Yeah.
Not in a move, but it just to keep yourself and other people safe.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. So
He had the knife in your face.
yeah,
saying,
so I put my leg down, and then again, I'm not sure about the timing, but when I realized, and of course that changed the dynamic when they saw me do that, but I think the fact that I was fully engaged with them the entire time, while the rest of the crew were completely in freeze mode, you know, fight, flight, or freeze, right? They were frozen, completely incapacitated. They zeroed in on me because I was fully engaged, and if they have any experience as robbers, then they would know that's unusual, and I'll get to that as well, because there's a reason why I was able to stay fully engaged. The fact of the matter is that what should have happened to me was what happened to the other crew members, which is to go into freeze. That's the body, the brain's natural way of dealing, automatic way, the mammalian brain's way of dealing with a situation like that. But I was fully engaged. But the fact that they could see that I was strategizing, in other words, so that I could have some kind of counterattack, right? They focused in on me. They planted that guy right beside me for the duration of their time on the yacht. So everybody had Mary had calmed down by that point. And then two of the guys started to spend more time out on the aft cockpit. There was something they were doing out there. I could hear them moving around. What I didn't know at that time was they were attempting to get our dinghy into the water, and that's what they were going to make their escape in, right? The engine was locked. That's why I'm thinking that maybe we were going to head out into the Atlantic the next morning, because typically these are the things you do before an ocean voyage. You lock everything down, tie everything down, etc. So the dinghy was up on davits, just off the aft cockpit, and they somehow managed to get that loose, lower that into the water. And then this is actually one of the most important things that happened during the event. Excuse me. So the guy with the big butcher knife, or the hunting knife, he went out into the aft cockpit, and he cut up some lines. And in the process of doing that, he somehow managed to cut his own finger. So he was bleeding from a cut from his own knife. But he came in with the rope, and the bite, or the bend in the rope was like this. So the rope was like this. He was holding the two ends, the bitter ends, like this. And he approached me first like this, and I knew exactly what it is he was saying. With that gesture, he wanted to tie us up. And again, without even thinking, I immediately did this with my arms, and I said, no tie, and I said it twice, no tie, no tie. He was taken aback a little bit. He stepped back, and he looked at me for a minute. And he didn't do it. He didn't attempt to to tie us up. He just let that go for now. And that's, I guess, where I drawn the line, right? Because again, you know, it doesn't take a genius to know that if you're tied up, you're completely helpless, right? Then, you know, the ball is completely in their court, right? They have complete control over us all. So again, I didn't even think about it. The words just came out of my mouth. And in fact, even as I was saying the words, it didn't even sound like me speaking. It was like, it was a strange experience. So anyway, he backed off, but then he had this cut on his finger, right? And so he was standing on the other side of the settee, and he was jamming his knife, or maybe that's where he cut it, when he was jamming his knife. And again, you can see the gouges in the wood on the counter there where this guy was doing that. But in either way, he somehow managed to put a cut right around here on his hand. And he was jamming his knife into, and I think he was doing this because at that point I had begun to make them nervous, because I had tried to leverage my foot, showing that I was prepared to attack if I needed to, and I refused to allow them to tie us up. So I had now put them on the defense, right? They realized that there's at least one person on board who isn't going to go down without a fight, right? So he was gouging the counter with this big knife. He managed to cut himself, and then he started sucking his blood. This is the truth. This is the true story. He started sucking his blood from his, and then making vampire noises at us, going, ah. And I don't know how the rest of the crew reacted to that, but it had no effect on me whatsoever. I was still just looking at some idiot, you know, some pathetic person who was terrorizing 4 people who, you know, done him no harm, right? They had taken, I think it was Dave's backpack, and they had been putting all of the stuff that they were going to make off with, the cash, computers, phones, wallets, all of that kind of stuff. They had that all jammed into Dave's backpack, and it was getting near the end.
How long was the whole thing?
Yeah, that's tough to say. I don't know, 15 minutes by that time. Okay. 15 minutes. So they were getting close to the end, where the robbers usually leave, and the end to me meant that's when they were going to decide whether they were going to leave us or they were going to try to kill us, right? And so when I realized that we were getting near the end and that they were running out of things to find on the yacht, running out of things to steal, I, as inconspicuously as I possibly could, I turned to Steve, who was sitting right beside me, and in my mind, it was basically, it came down to Steve and I to fight our way out of that if we have to, if they attacked us. And apologies to Dave, because Dave's 70 years old. He looks like a 70-year-old, but he's probably the toughest, strongest man I've ever met in my life. I didn't know that about him. So apologies to Steve, not to make him any sort of a diminutive sort of player in this. But that's just what my mind was telling me based on what I knew of the people on board. So I had basically ruled out Dave as a possibility, to fight our way out, and I obviously ruled Mary out. So it came down to Steve and I. And of course we were being scoped from shore by the robbers, and I'm certain that's what they saw. They saw a very small, older female, and they saw an elderly man, and then Steve and I. So in their minds, it was basically 3 of them against Steve and I. So as inconspicuously as I could, I turned my head just enough so that I could see his eyes and said to Steve, Steve, if it comes down to it and they try to kill us, it's going to be you and me, right? So get ready, be ready. But Steve was gone. He wasn't there. Again, same thing, blank, glazed over look, hands on the table. And that's when I actually really started to worry seriously for the first time during the attack, because I realized in my mind it came down to me. Now, I don't know if a fight developed, if they came for us and they tried to kill us with their knives, maybe Steve would have come out of, that state he was in, and I don't know, maybe would have kicked all their butts. Anything's possible. Dave may very well have done it himself, but coming from my perspective, as far as I was concerned, it was all on, the onus was on me to, at the very least, think our way out of this, right? So once again, the guy came with the rope, and the same thing, just automatically, no tie, and I said it even more forcefully this time. And at that point, I think I heard a very small voice from both Steve and Dave, and I think they both said, yeah, no tie, in a very soft kind of voice, which made me feel a little better because they were starting to come around now. So again, no tie. Again, they backed off because, a robber doesn't want a fight, right? A robber wants to come on board, get your stuff, and make a getaway, right? And they certainly don't want to risk any injury to themselves or even death or capture on their part, right? So they backed off from that. And it was pretty clear in the way I was speaking and the way I was looking at them and the way I remained fully engaged with them the entire time that I was prepared to fight, right? And they didn't want that. So all of a sudden there was a flurry of excitement. One of the guys came back in and they were jabbering away in their language. They were looking for something, they wanted something. And it turned out that what they wanted was the key for the lock. The key for the lock on the dinghy or something like that, to be able to access the dinghy fully. So, and miraculously, I think it was Dave that figured out that this is what they wanted. I didn't have a clue, and I wouldn't have been able to figure that out at all. And Dave, I think, suddenly yelled out, "The dinghy key! They want the dinghy key!" Well, it happened to be in the navigation center, right? And the nav center, typically, there's a desk with a lid that pops up where you can put in navigational instruments and charts and things like that. And Dave was right beside it, so I think he lifted it up. The attackers, the robbers, took the keys. They were gone for a moment, and I guess one of the ringleader came back into the salon once they'd figured out how to fully disengage the dinghy. And then he started to close the door, the sliding door. So a catamaran is basically like a floating apartment, and they typically have a sliding door that allows you to get out to the aft cockpit, right? And that's when my heart started to beat a mile a minute, because that was the defining moment, whether they were going to leave us unharmed or whether they were going to attempt to kill us. And I watched painfully as he closed that sliding door, because I was watching to see if he stepped outside, and then that means they were leaving. But if he stayed inside, it means he was going to try to kill us, right? Well, he was halfway in and halfway out, and he pulled a sliding door almost right up to his chest. So it looked like he was trying to squeeze in, like when a person tries to squeeze through a narrow space. So he pulled the sliding door right up to his chest, with his arm and his right leg still inside, the right side of his body still inside the salon. And with his knife, that's when he was saying, "No police, no police." And, we got it. And at that point, then everybody piped up and said, "Yeah, no police, no police." And at that point, I remember trying to restrain myself as hard as I could because I just wanted to yell out. And I'll just say what I was thinking. I wanted to yell out, "Get the fuck out of here. Get the fuck off our yacht." Like, that's where I was at that point. And the anger started to come in at that point, right? Because I'd spent that whole time, eating humble pie, staying calm, keeping everybody else calm, and I was just about ready to burst, right? So finally he closed the door and they were gone. So I told everybody to just sit still for a moment, listening to see where they were, what they were doing. I don't know, it was about a minute or two. I got up and immediately locked the sliding doors. And that's when all hell broke loose with the crew. Maggie just went off her head, wailing and letting out all of her pent-up fear. And Steve, Dave, and I, we at that point then began to search for communication devices, right? But they had taken everything, our handheld VHF radios, our phones, everything was gone. So we had no way of communicating with anybody, port authorities, and no one to alert them as to what had just occurred. So I opened, after a few minutes, I opened the door, the sliding door, stepped out into the aft cockpit. I could see there wasn't anybody on board. I saw that the dinghy was gone. At that point then, I had them turn on all the nav lights. So all the running lights, everything was turned on, including the mast light and some other spotlights that we had on board. I walked out to the front, to the bow of the catamaran. Everybody followed, and I just stood there for a minute thinking about, okay, what do we do now? What's our next move? So at that point then, I called for the anchor to be brought up. Mary was on that right away. She immediately went forward to the windlass, and Steve took control. I think it was Steve took control of the motor buttons. Right, there are a couple of buttons that allow you to lower the anchor, and then to bring the anchor up. The windlass will turn in two different directions. So we did that, and then I had them motor over to, and again, all of this you can see in the video, on the YouTube videos, to motor over to, there's a fishing village, a fish market, I should say, where fishing boats were tied up in typical fish market fashion, where they're tied up in tandem, like tied up one, like sometimes even 5 in a row. So each vessel is tied to the other, to the first one, which is tied to the pier or the dock, right? So we slowly motored in there, and I was going to wait till we were close enough, and in Spanish explain to whoever was there, and it was well after the fish market had closed, but there were still some people hanging around, a few workers, I think, still cleaning up in the dark, right? I was gonna wait till I was close enough and then call out in Spanish that we've been robbed and we need to speak to the police, but that was it, right? And in fact, I don't even think I said that we were robbed, that we just need the police. There's an emergency and we need the police. And then, so that was to our port side, to our starboard side, about, I don't know, 25 meters away. There is a giant pier. Again, you can see that in the videos, a giant concrete pier where the large cargo vessels tie up to and then unload and then take on cargo and that kind of thing. So what happened next, Steve and Mary, they started screaming out at the top of their lungs, "Help, help, help, we've been robbed, we've been robbed." And I'm calling out to them saying, "Stop that, don't do that, please stop yelling," right? And I'm including this bit in with this story, with this narration, because it's important. So the way I was trying to do it is the best way to do it, because you're keeping it on the down low, but you're getting the help you need. You're making the people understand that you need police help, that it's an emergency, right? But by yelling and screaming, you're alerting everybody, including people on the street, that you're now in a vulnerable situation, right? That you're completely vulnerable, that you've already been robbed, you're already in a state of fear. So anybody else that decided to do it could have easily boarded us again and taken, whatever was left, or just had fun terrorizing people, or maybe, killing the people on board, right? So you don't want to advertise in that way that you've been robbed, that you've been attacked, right? And most specifically, again, as an experienced sailor, a lot of this happens. So for example, if this had happened in Fort Lauderdale, absolutely, scream away, bring as many people over as possible. But when you're in a touristy area, especially an island chain, the police work very differently there, right? Because the people who are listening, the criminal element who are listening to you now yelling and screaming, telling everybody that you've just been robbed and that you're in this vulnerable situation, and that you have no communication devices, because if you did, you wouldn't be screaming out the way you were. You'd be on your phones or your radios, whatever, communicating to somebody that you need help, right? So you're advertising that you're complete sitting ducks, right? So the criminal element, they very well know how the police work, right? How the system works. And a lot of times in the islands, the police won't even show until the next day. And if they do show, it's almost always an hour or two, sometimes longer. And in our case, the police did not show. But even nowadays in North America, in a large North American city, you call in the police and it could take them, right? Even in a modern city, it could take them up to half an hour, I don't know. I've never had to call the police here. Maybe it takes even longer for the police to respond, depending on what the crime is, right? So it turns out that the police did not show up until the next morning, but there was some communication. We told them that, no, hang on a second. They didn't come to the yacht, but we did end up at the police station, yes.
Did you anchor there?
We tied up to that big concrete pier. Yeah, we tied up there temporarily. So we did end up at the police station. But again, as I say, just to sort of validate the point that I was trying to make, the police did not come. So if there were other criminal people there, they would know, well, the police aren't going to come, so we can go on board and take, anything else we want. Heck, maybe let's go and take the whole yacht, right? And throw the people overboard and just take the whole yacht, or kill the people, or whatever. Anything is possible, right? So that's why you don't yell and scream at the top of your lungs, advertising to the whole world that you've been robbed, that you've been attacked, right? You try to keep it on the down low. Get the message across to people that you need police help, you need emergency police help. So anyway, we did somehow, I think maybe one of the locals drove us, or we took a cab. We ended up at the police station, we filed a report. We went back to I think it was just, it was just Steve and myself while we went to the police station. Again, Steve was sort of, still in that state of shock. He was coming out of it. I was still fully engaged, to the point actually where one of the detectives asked me if I was military or ex-military by my calm, demeanor. We were driven back to the yacht. I basically stayed up all night. I couldn't sleep. Steve and Mary went below and they got some sleep. Dave stayed up with me for a bit. We were just sort of chatting about, whatever. And a lot of the locals had gathered around and very kindly sort of stayed with us. Clearly, this is what they were doing. They were staying with us as protection and to make us feel better, about what had just happened, and to give us that sort of feeling of safety again, right? And then the next morning, the police came. They did the usual dusting for fingerprints, etc., etc. And that's pretty much what happened.
Wow. So when you say the locals stayed, did they come on? Did they ask to come on, or were they just on the pier, or you just heard them talking,
Yeah.
or?
Yeah, they were just on the pier, and also there were 2 other cargo ships there. And I had actually initially asked for the captains to come out. I wanted to speak to their captains directly, because the captain would instantly know what to do, but it turns out neither captain was on board at the time. So what had happened is a lot of the guys that were hanging around were actually crew from the other 2 yachts. And they hung around for a bit,
That's incredible.
And
That's
that- yeah.
incredible,
Yeah.
incredibly thoughtful
Yeah,
and kind of them.
That was really, really kind of them to do that. I felt better about the whole thing, of course, and I'm sure the others did too.
So you stayed up all night,
Yeah.
and
there was-
then what happened the next day?
The police came. I was somewhere else at some point, so I actually wasn't there. Or I think actually the police who did the fingerprints and whatnot showed up when I was back at the police station, because I went back because Steve had given his statement. I wanted to give my statement, and of course I had to report the things that had been stolen from me personally, right? My wallet, watch, and some other things, right? So yeah, so there's the